Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. This evening we'll be discussing a number of issues pertaining to the region and the latest escalation in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. With us this evening to discuss these issues, a distinguished gentleman with us is His Excellency Ambassador Hamdy Saleh, former Assistant Secretary, Foreign Minister. A pleasure to have you with us.
Delighted.
President Sisi wrapped up a few hours ago visit to Kuwait. They discussed a number of issues of mutual concern and future strategic cooperation. How do you see Kuwaiti-Egyptian relations, especially at this juncture in restoring regional stability? How can we partner with each other to do that?
To start with, I'd like to emphasize an important point, which is the presidential diplomacy. The president has been moving in a number of areas. And he was in Europe in attending that conference with the African and European countries. He was in Cairo here, in the same 10 days or same week.
Yes.
He met with the president of Djibouti. He has several meetings with other leaders, and also he's meeting with John Kerry today, the U.S. representative to the environmental issues. And then he's now in Kuwait. This movement by itself is very important because that's leading the Egyptian foreign policy and diplomacy. It is really giving a pioneering effort in opening new doors. And it is up to the other institutions of the country to follow up and to benefit from these moves. That's a starting point. But second, with regard to Kuwait in particular, we are here in a situation which is very difficult. The entire Arab region, and not only the Arab region, but the Middle East at large, is in a very bad shape, as all of us know. And one of the issues which lately Kuwait interfered and made some effort to reconcile was the issue of Lebanon. And Egypt has a special interest in Lebanon, and the initiative by the Kuwaiti foreign minister to go to Lebanon and to present a few ideas and so on was very much welcomed by Egypt. But I give that as an example of the issues which will be or have been on the table of discussion between the president and the Emir of Kuwait. Because in a sense, what we are facing at this particular point is that we have only Egypt and the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, are stable countries, whereas most of the other countries, apart from the western parts, Morocco and Algeria and so on, we're talking about the eastern part of the Arab world, are not really stable. We have really conflicts everywhere. So in order to be able to maximize the effort to stabilize these spots of tension and spots of conflict, it will be very important to meet with the leaders, not only to rely on the traditional diplomacy and delegations, but to have meetings on that level. That develops a certain vision between the two leaders, and to see to what extent they can really exert more effort to move ahead by creating certain stability in the region, which will benefit everybody. Kuwait in particular is facing a difficult situation. The Gulf is facing a very difficult situation between the tension between Iran and the West, the tension and the conflicts in Iraq, the tension and the conflicts in Syria. All this has an impact on the Gulf. And in Yemen as well, and particularly in Kuwait. So to be able to communicate with the Kuwaiti leadership and to find out how can we cooperate together to advance the issue of stability and peace is very important at this particular juncture. But also because of what you said, that the world at large is facing a very big crisis, which is this Ukrainian issue, and hopefully something will stabilize somehow.
Recently, security conference was wrapped up in Munich. A lot of issues pertaining to this region really were addressed in the conference. How do you see the wrap-up? Do you think leaders agreed, represented in their foreign ministers and stuff, did they agree on an agenda to resolve hot conflicts, in your opinion?
I did not follow, in details the Munich conference, which is a traditional conference. It's being convened every year, and the leaders find it an opportunity to give presentation and really talk a little bit with each other. But it was overshadowed by the Ukrainian issue. Everybody was talking about what could be done in the Ukrainian issue. And the Ukrainian issue is not really an issue about Ukraine. It is an issue about the relationship between the East and West, between the stability and security in Europe, and actually the future of the international system at large. So that's why I thought most of the discussion were focused on that. But in addition to this, there are three major issues which I think the people there who are concerned, the Europeans in particular, talked about, which is Libya, which is Syria, and which is Yemen.
Yes.
These three issues were raised. There is an agreement on the main outlines of what should be done. And the problem that, in spite of the fact that they have an agreement, that, the mercenaries should go out from Libya, that, stabilization of Syria, that, the Houthis should be constrained, but nothing is being done. That's a major issue. To talk, but then you have to act.
Speaking of Libya, today, Dbeibeh said that he will hand over that they will have legislative elections and that they will respect the UN sponsorship deadline, which is June 24th. Do you think differences can be reconciled and Libyans can actually go to the polling stations by then?
It's a pity we are coming to square number one in Libya, that the most of the issues which we thought that has been resolved is coming back. Libya is really suffering again from two legitimacy, or two governments who have different legitimacy claims. And Dbeibeh or Bash Agha, both are good people. I thought they can do a good job. But the issue is really, to what extent you can really reconcile them, I don't know. The problem is that the irony of things is that they both came from the same city, from Misrata. And they both more or less have good relations with all sides of the conflict. They have good relations with Turkey, they have good relations with Egypt, they have good relations with France, and with other countries in Europe, and even with Qatar. So to what extent we can really get something out of that is not clear yet. But this is a tragedy, because the Libyan nation has been suffering for so long. The wealth has been depleted, and nothing is really moving on. I think it would be better if the Miss Williams will be able to reconcile them and to get things done. One of the problems which was raised at the beginning is this: Miss Williams, representing the United Nations, did not support immediately Bash Agha, and she gave some hints that she supports Dbeibeh. And as a result of things were wavering, it was not clear.
Joseph Borrell said that in the Munich conference, he said that time has come to reinforce multilateral order. And he was stressing that this will be depending on respect of international law, universal rights, the strength of international organizations like the United Nations. Taking into account how we see certain parties operating vis-a-vis the United Nations, the power of the UN in reinforcement, unilateral actions that are in clear violation of international law. What kind of multilateral order are we in for?
Yeah, we are in the middle of a major international crisis which really calls into question the international system at large and the United Nations' role. And here we are facing Russia is facing the West, and two republics have been recognized by Russia. There is so much tension in Europe, something which we did not witness for the last 50 years or so. So that's a major issue, and that's a major problem and crisis. Would that lead to a new understanding between the major powers and really move on? This is a question mark, but it seems that the Cold War is coming back, and that is not really something which is very encouraging for the world at large, for the United Nations, and for the medium and small countries in particular. In the past, the Cold War in the past, which was in the 1960s, 1970s, there was a conflict between these two sides, the East and West, based on ideology.
Yes.
So if you convert to their ideology, you can go with them. Now it's not clear where you stand. It's more or less interest and the strategic interests and the markets and so on. So things are not clear. The new alliance between, or new cooperation agreements between China and Russia is really getting more impact on the West and creating concern. And also the idea of mixing politics with economics, that now once we have this conflict, so the Russian gas will not go to Europe. And all these issues are very important. Even the problem of the exportation of wheat and other agricultural materials from Russia and Ukraine might have a major impact on the Middle East. So things are really not very clear at this particular point. To have Mr. Borrell talking about the international rules and values, it's something welcome, but we are not really in a stage to be able to say this will happen. We need to work on it. We need to work to not to reinvent the wheel, but to try to really get a new vision for the world order, which will stabilize the situation both in Europe, in the Middle East, and other parts of the world.
He also had another statement, which even here, there was a time that we personally addressed, which is democracy. He said democracy is implemented to suit national conditions. Is it just to suit national conditions, or are we imposing certain types of democracy for international conditions or international needs?
Democracy is an issue which has been used by so many for different reasons. So it's a slogan, and it's something which it was good all the time. But when it's used politically for political interest, it does not really serve anybody. So for the West to come and talk about democracy in Africa or in the Middle East, they ignore the issue that democracy is a process.
Yes.
It goes in stages until you really enlighten the community and the society, and then each will know his civil rights and civil duties, and then based on that you'll have democracy. But if you don't have a community which has these values of civil rights and civil duties implanted in the minds and hearts of the people, then it's very difficult to really move to a democracy. That's one issue. But the second issue is that you have now extremist groups which are really disrupting the political system, regardless whether it's a political system, democratic or not democratic, and what to do with them. Then you have the conflicts between countries and so on. And you have the countries which are torn in what you call civil wars. So based on this, it's very difficult to just talk it in a very simplistic terms and say we need to have democracy everywhere. How we need to take it in the process. We need to involve all these parties, and we need to deal with the issue of terrorism, of extremism, and the issue of conflicts, civil wars in these countries.
How do you see the development of the situation between Russia and Ukraine? I mean, today President Vladimir Putin took a position vis-a-vis the eastern part of Ukraine, and the world is watchful. Strong statements by world leaders. The EU is of the position of taking sanctions. The US is supporting. How do you see this conflict progressing?
I see escalation. I see very dangerous impact on the world system at large. And by the way, about a few days ago, there was a leak from certain sources in America that probably what will happen in Ukraine, that it will be divided between American influence or Western influence and Russian influence and so on. So, and then President Biden said, well, I was expecting that. I was expecting these type of moves from Putin. Poor the Ukraine is really facing that tough situation. But as I said, it's not really the Ukraine is only the issue. The issue is wider than that, because what Russia is trying to do is to re-establish new terms of reference with regard to the world system, and with regard in particular to the European security, and with regard to the equality between the two superpowers again, where Russia apparently felt that they were not really giving them enough consideration. So the situation now is very dangerous. It's escalating. Hopefully it will never go into a conflict, a military conflict. It went into limited military conflict. Amazingly enough, that it goes again into the old fashion of the Cold War, by what you call to have war by proxy. You have other people fighting for the major powers. They did that in Afghanistan. They did that in the Middle East. They did it everywhere. Now they are doing it in Ukraine. That's a little bit going too far. Europe is a continent which has been stable for so long. So hopefully we can establish certain terms of reference and get back into stability.
President Joe Biden announced that he is calling the first tranche of the sanctions against Russia, including steps to starve the country of financing.
Tough. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. But the point is, the international financial system is integrated system, and to be able to cut one major part of the world from it will be very difficult, and it will have an impact, a negative impact on the international financial system at large. So I know that they talked very widely about that, SWIFT and so on, but I don't know whether that could be implemented, and if that will be implemented, what will be the impact on the system. And I hope that will not go that far.
Should we go into sanctions? In your opinion, is this going to be an issue whose impact is just on Europe or the world at large?
As I mentioned, this is something going beyond the Ukraine. It's beyond Europe as well. It goes wider to the international system at large, because in the final analysis, we had, in the last 70 years since the establishment of the United Nations, we had a mechanism where issues could be discussed in the Security Council or the General Assembly, and somehow some ideas, formulas for cooperation could be developed between the major powers to be able to resolve issues which are facing us. Now, if you have that type of Cold War and that type of standoff between Russia, between Moscow and Washington, between Moscow and London and Paris and so on, and Germany, then how can we get this type of reconciliation? How can we get this kind of coalition for peace? So it will be very difficult to get the mechanism which we had in the past working efficiently. It was not working efficiently in the past, but now it will even be less efficient. That's number one. But number two, now the medium-sized countries and the small countries, particularly the Middle East, will have a very difficult time to deal with which side. If the sensitivity will become very acute with regard to the Americans say, if you deal with this side, then you are not with us, like the old time.
Yes.
When
so you're either with us or against us.
Yeah, there was a very long time. There was a Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, who said, "Well, you are either with us or against us," and that concept really created a certain vacuum in the international system, because you cannot really tell us, either you come our camp or not. So we hope not to go that far. We hope that to be able to go into a more stable time. And there was this suggestion by the Americans to have a conference, summit again between Biden and Putin. The Kremlin said, well, it's not about time yet. And then he moved into this step. I don't know whether could be a way to get a formula for reconciliation or not. And also a reconciliation within the Ukraine, because the Ukrainians themselves are divided. There is at least a large minority who speaks Russian and who is more intimate with the Russian culture and so on. But it's about time to be able to reconcile the integrity of the Ukrainian nation at large, and also to look into the European security as something which is very vital for the world security at large. But to have a war or a semi-war or Cold War in Europe is not really something which will help at all the international system to move on.
Putin said earlier today that he sees the way to resolve the crisis, the Ukraine crisis, is for his troops to stay on the ground, is for Ukraine to drop its ambitions for NATO membership and stay neutral.
Do you ask my comment? I cannot comment on Vladimir Putin. He's a top man. He knows what he's talking about. But at any rate, This is an issue of security.
In your opinion, will this resolve the conflict?
Look, this is an issue of security, mutual security between the West and Russia. Russia and China now. Putin is emphasizing the point that, if the NATO will come very close to the borders and the missiles and all these things will come very close, that will be a threat to Moscow itself and to the Kremlin. So is it possible to resolve that issue now when you have such a fever for enmity and violence and so on? It could have been done a little bit some time ago when things were still stable. It could have been done by more cognitive or congenial discussion between the leaders. But now at this particular point it became like hitting head by head, and that's not very helpful for resolving the issue. So I believe it will take some time until things cool down, and then we will look into formulas for resolution.
Can Europe afford an escalation right now? Let us not forget that economically, not just Europe, but the whole world is really suffering in the aftermath of COVID. And economically and financially, economies are trying to get things together. And any escalation right now, is it affordable?
I was watching on TV the troops from the Russian side and from Ukrainian side and the Western forces with one of my younger friends. And his comment was, my God, how can they do all this in the cold with the snow there and so on? So we are talking not only about COVID-19 and about the problems which are facing, but we are talking about all the winter, which is very severe. And in spite of that, because of the heat of the issue, the issue is very hot for Russia. The Russian troops moved in a very large scale. So I think the world was not ready for another crisis, like what you said. Your comment was very relevant. I think the world was ready for really moving ahead and taking it easy and developing economically and trying to work out solutions. We have enough problems in the Middle East. We have enough problems in Africa. And in Europe, anyway, there was issues for economic revival. They had problems for the health and even the transportation and the immigration and so on. There's so many problems. So on top of that, now we have all this tension, which will create a certain feeling that in order to be able to reach to these issues which we talked about, COVID-19 and the immigration issue and the illegal or illegal and the terrorism and all these things and other issues, economic revival, we need to bypass this major crisis, which is now, it will take time. I don't think this crisis will die on very, very quickly. It will take some time with this decision of Putin to recognize Donetsk and other republic. That creates now an issue, a major issue in Europe, which will have to be discussed and talked about for some time.
Energy, because you just said the snow and the weather and another a critical issue, which is the energy. As we supplies to Europe have been affected, and should this conflict be prolonged, supplies will be even further affected. What will this do? Already energy prices have risen. The world economies are really going to pay the price for that. It's an added number to already heavy bills. How is this going to affect this globally? I mean, can the world really afford this right now?
Long time when I was a student at the school and the university, there was a word which was really celebrated everywhere, which was called interdependence. Depending, each country is depending on the other, and the group of countries depending on the other group. When you talk about energy and that the Russians will stop sending gas to Europe, and that will create a major issue, major crisis, of course, because of energy. You talk also about the issue that this is a major exports of Russia, and if they don't export it, the gas and other sources, petroleum and so on, then that would be a major problem for them. So there is interdependence here. There is, both of them need each other. The same thing when we talk about the fact that Egypt and other countries here, we are importing a very large amount of wheat and food stuff from Russia and Ukraine. That's true. We are importers, but also they are exporters. They have this 80% of the Russian income is coming from exporting these type of materials, and the Ukraine the same thing. So they are also depending on the importers and the other side. So taking that into consideration, I think these issues will be resolved faster than the political issue. That in the final analysis, both need each other, and they have to find a formula for resolving it. Now, in the middle of the crisis, I hear that the gas of this line going to Germany will be stopped. I hear about sanctions by Britain, by Germany, by France, and by the US. I hear about reaction from Russia, which is very angry. I hear about concerns in Egypt and other countries in the Middle East of importation of wheat and so on. We have so many issues hanging, and it's true you have a very good reason to be concerned. But as I said, the code here is interdependence. We cannot survive without this interdependence.
A statement was issued by Egypt, Jordan, Germany, and France pertaining to the situation in the Middle East. The oldest and the one that is in dire need of resolving is the Palestinian conflict. Do you think conferences, the Munich conference, has it in any way bridged the differences, even pushed in any way forth the parties to work on achieving a two-state solution, which we have been calling on for years now?
As I said, I did not follow in details what the Munich conference has decided and discussed. But bearing in mind that I don't have the details, I would say that the Palestinian issue, is a very complicated issue, and it's a clear example of the lack of justice in the international system at large. Now, with this issue, several people are comparing with this issue of the Ukraine. Everybody is jumping in the Security Council and everywhere to talk about that. That's an aggression and so on. But what about the aggression on the Palestinians, which has been going on for years? So, is it a double standard, or what could be done? I think we need to wait a little bit until the clouds of this major crisis clear up a little bit, to see what will be the balance of power which will come after that, and to see what will be the impact on the Middle East, and to see to what extent we can really utilize the new balance of power to move the Palestinian issue to a better and more just results.
Situation in the region. In your opinion, which conflicts can we consolidate efforts to resolve in a speedy fashion to secure regional security, in your opinion?
Look, the region is really torn apart by the interference of the two major and extra-regional forces, Turkey and Iran. Turkey has been interfering in 4 countries, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Libya. And of course, lately they also interfered in Ethiopia. And Iran has been interfering and penetrating Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen. So the relationship with the two extra-regional powers is very important, how to really contain them, how to deal with them. I see some efforts by the United Arab Emirates to really try to balance things by having contacts with Iran, having contacts with Turkey, the visit of Erdogan to the Emirates and so on, and then the visit of the President of Iran to Qatar. I see diplomatic movements from so many parties, but in a sense, there is no yet an Arab consensus on what to do with these issues, and that is the problem. This is our region. These are our own problems, our own crises. And always we are thinking about what could be done from the international system, from the other forces. But it's about time to develop some mechanism for a consensus and to move based on steps to really try to contain these issues. The Syrian issue, for example, now is under consideration, that Syria should come back to the Arab fold, if that could be said. There have been give and take about that. That conference of the Arab Summit in Algeria, which is expected after Ramadan, after April. But all this has to be, there is a new blood which has to be put into this, new vision which has to be, presented. And if that will not happen, then we will continue the same path, or basically the region is up for grabs by the regional power, the extra-regional powers, and by the international system. And in spite of the fact that the region is up for grabs for everybody, the wealth of the region is being depleted for nothing. And the Libyan wealth, the Libyan oil and petroleum and gas, if Libya was stable now, it could have really helped Europe very much with the gas issue. If Syria was stable now, then the immigration, the illegal immigration and so on could have been stopped. If Iraq was stable now, then the issue of the petroleum and so on, the oil prices will not go up. So it's quite clear that there is an interest for the world at large to have stability in the region. Even the issue of terrorism is really threatening everybody. Now we are talking about also Yemen. The conflict in Yemen is threatening the transportation via the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. But not enough effort is being done to contain these issues. Of course, as I said, we always blame the international system, but it's about time that we talk about also the regional system. How can we move the regional system to contain these conflicts?
And in your opinion, is a solution to moving or developing a regional system where the need arises to resolve internal conflicts within this region, can this be done with any foreign meddling on the ground?
No, not at all. I mean, the foreign meddling in the ground, as you mentioned, is really a very important factor. Disrupts the stability of the countries. As we have seen, Libya is really suffering very much from the Turkish, penetration and the mercenaries and all these things, and other forces are meddling as well. Not only Turkey, but as a result of that, there is no stability in Libya, and Libya is really being wasted, both the resources and the people. Also, we have the same situation in Syria. This is unbelievable that all these forces are penetrating Syria and really having a negative impact on the Syrian stability. The other example is, of course, Yemen. Houthi could not really continue all these efforts without the support of Iran. So Iraq is another example where the Iranians are really moving a big section of the political forces over there. So this is an issue which is really creating havoc in this region, which is the meddling of the extra-regional powers and of the international system at large. If the international system behaves in a rational way, and if the United Nations behaves in a way to really help stability, then there will be a change. But that's not what's happening now. The Europeans are divided themselves about Libya, about Syria, about Iraq. The Americans and the Europeans are not really clear about what they do with Yemen, and about what to do with the Nahda Renaissance Dam, whatever. And as a result of that, we are suffering from this, no clarity. And as a matter of fact, when there is no clarity, and the major powers are just blind about the negative impact of that, then medium-sized powers like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and so on will suffer, because we are constrained from using our force to stand up to these threats because of the international system. But at the same time, the international system is not helping to resolve this issue. And that is a dilemma facing countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, us in terms of the Renaissance Dam, and Saudi Arabia in terms of Yemen.
Your Excellency, unfortunately our time is up. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this evening on To The Point. Always a pleasure to have you with us. I'd like to thank you, the
Thank you very
viewers.
much.
Wish you a very pleasant evening, and we'll see you same time next week. Until then, good night.